they're trying to stimulate, but the tool is not fit for the job. The tool of a central bank is not fit for the job of stimulating economic activity. What it is fit for is stimulating a depression. So then what happens? Well, they have a hammer in one hand and a mallet in the other, and they say, well, we broke it with this, and we're going to fix it with this. So they just keep printing more.
It's my pleasure to welcome Dan Ferris. You've probably heard his name out there. I've been reading his work for years. He is editor of Extreme Value at Stansberry Research and the host of the Stansberry Investor Hour podcast. Dan, welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Great to be here, Jason.
It's good to have you on, and you're coming from Vancouver, Washington, right?
That is correct, yes.
On a rare sunny day.
Yep. A rare sunny day.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, hey, we appreciate you spending some time with us, Dan. I guess I'll start with just asking you about your overall take on the economy in these very tumultuous times. It seems like we've got a divided economy, a very uneven recovery, if we call it a recovery, and your expectations for the future. I'll just kind of let you take it where you want to start.
Well, first things first, it's been an insane year, and we had this enormous contraction, this, as far as the depth of the contraction, like 1930s depth, obviously a lot faster, but that kind of depth. And as you say, it's bifurcated, isn't it? There's, one part of the economy has really took off, right? The stay-at-home portion, then hospitality and other things have just been crushed. And my fear is that I'm very confident that we're not going back. Pre-COVID, we will never see that again. And among other things, it's really no great controversial statement to suggest that a lot more people are going to work at home, COVID or not, virus or not. It won't ever be the same again. And travel is the one thing that it kind of drives me a little bit crazy, because I think we could probably have a lot less restrictions on things like travel and eating out and all that. But man, in the meantime, you can hardly go anywhere. I mean, it's a pain in the neck, and it's really depressing economically. So,
and I think the opportunists, the tyrants in government, are using this as a fantastic excuse for them to just intrude into our lives, gain more control over us, and do a lot of very unconstitutional things. Right to assemble, right to associate. I mean, nobody talks too much about our right to associate with whomever we want, but soon there'll be contact tracing everywhere. And this is a dictator's dream. It's just, they must be loving it right now, the tyrants that are control freaks, right? It
is a dictator's dream. And the playbook is, to people like us, Jason, it seems so obvious. But what I hear from, people around me, just, people I see from day to day, they think, well, we all need to wear masks, we all need to be careful, and we can't, see each other on Thanksgiving and whatnot. And I just think this is insane. I mean, it's amazing that there are as many voices as there are in the medical community saying, this is ridiculous. It's absurd. We've shut down the country for nothing, but you hardly ever hear them. You might hear that person once a week on Tucker Carlson or something like that, or maybe on your show, but you don't hear those voices, and they're credible voices that need to be heard.
Of course they are. And Dan, it's interesting, everybody loves to bash conspiracy theories, but the reality is there are conspiracies all around us all the time. And what I like to say is that the great conspiracy of, original colonists conspiring against England, America was a conspiracy, and it was a great one. So, would they have been called conspiracy wackos with tinfoil hats, our founding fathers? No.
Yeah, they would have been called militia, by the current current lefty crowd. But you're exactly right. People know that when they aggregate their resources, they become more powerful. They know that if they're very modest means, and they know that for sure if they're centimillionaires and billionaires and well-connected people in government, they understand what it means to aggregate power and push other folks around, and they do it. It's funny that we have these terms conspiracy theory, because who doesn't know that this is how human beings behave? It's a little absurd.
Right. No, it is totally. And the conspiracy point that I wanted to make is that it's hard to argue that the mainstream media isn't a coordinated effort, because like you were saying, you see so few dissenting voices in the mainstream media. They all sort of publish the same headlines in lockstep. It's amazing how coordinated it is, whether it be mainstream media or social media and big tech, which I'm lumping all those together. The big tech is probably the most abusive of all. It's like they're coordinating the whole story. The whole narrative is it's the same.
I agree with you, but I heard something recently that rang true. Naval Ravikant, the angelist entrepreneur and sort of philosopher, he was talking about all this, and he said, though, if you look throughout history, like technological advances, society tends to lean left at these times, so, and when we look at the media, it's completely technologically driven, right? The ability to reach more and more people is strictly a function of technology. We went from print to TV to internet, and it just got wider and wider, and it leans harder and harder and harder left as that happens, right? When we were a print culture, I think we were a lot more reasonable. We had plenty of so-called progressive ideas and things, and but then radio came and TV came and internet came, and we just lean harder and harder left. So I don't think you don't need an outright conspiracy of folks meeting clandestinely, but it leans that way anyway. It's so very obviously leans that way that you can't dismiss it. And nowadays, I'm somebody who says bad ideas are on the right, bad ideas are on the left. The government wins every election and the voters lose every election. So I don't really care.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And regardless of which political party wins, the government always wins.
Which party is gonna run on shrinking the government?
Yeah.
Nobody wants that at this point. The electorate has thoroughly been inculcated. We had these big leaps forward basically after the Civil War and then after the Great Depression and World War II. And we're thoroughly inculcated with this idea that government needs to do everything. So now the electorate is all about, which one of these guys is going to give my group more stuff?
Yeah.
And it's group, right? It's become pure collectivism. No matter how you slice it, there's no more place for the individual. So
it's collectivism at the lobbyist level. It's the corporatocracy collectivism. Right. Yep. And, that dinner that Gavin Newsom had the other night when he broke the rules and, completely just disregarded everything he tells everybody else to do. It's unbelievable.
Right. It's hypocrisy. I mean, I certainly have no problem with people going to a restaurant and not wearing a mask. I don't care. However, it is typical hypocrisy. For thee, the rules are for thee and not for me.
Yeah, of course. And Nancy Pelosi at her hair salon and all the rest. Let's talk about what this means financially to us and where the economy is going. We started out talking about how it's uneven. Is there a movement that, do we need to worry about a bank collapse? At the beginning of this, I was quite worried about that. I entertained it for a short time. I didn't stay very worried about it, but, the FDIC certainly can't insure all the deposits, not even close. But it just seems like no matter what, the answer is just print more money. That's the way out of everything. And Jerome Powell's been extremely transparent, I mean, at least compared to Greenspan. Just look at whatever you need. Rich Uncle Jerome's going to print it for you. What does that all mean to us?
Well, yeah, I mean, he recently said, we can do more and Congress needs to do more in no uncertain terms. And, you've got Lagarde is saying the same thing over in Europe. So, the fiscal stimulus needs to be greater and the central bank will do everything it can and all that. So that is happening. But if you're going to talk about the kind of, talk about a bank collapse and the FDIC, and then you mentioned money printing, and that is really, that's, if you want to think in terms of economic deterioration, it revolves around the ability of the Federal Reserve to print money, and the scheme at this point is still the basic quantitative easing scheme. We hit return on the computer, we create money out of thin air, and then we buy securities with it. And right now we're buying debt, the Federal Reserve is buying debt securities, including corporate debt and ETFs and things, bond ETFs. So you look at that, that is actually a deflationary act, because what you are doing is you are swapping. The Fed, they don't buy securities because they're saving up for retirement, or they want to have a portfolio of securities to borrow money against to create a business. They've taken them out of the system and putting them on their balance sheet, and it effectively the income disappears from the system. And now they've exchanged that for just $1 of reserves. It just sits there. And if it isn't lent and spent, you don't get the very obvious, inflationary rise in the price of things, assets, wages, etc. Right now, these operations really, they push the bond market around, that pushes interest rates around, and it has some kind of an impact on the stock market as well. Although I recently saw a paper, there was an article in Barron's that said, yeah, the Fed put is real, but it really only is effective after, in the time somewhat after a collapse. You need that downdraft for the market to really lean heavily on the Fed. So come on, do something, and then we'll start buying again. So I expect this to continue. I expect the Fed to keep the Bank of Japan playbook going, and maybe even go that one step further. Bank of Japan, they were buying equities. I think they may still be. I haven't kept up with that, but that's the playbook, right? Print money, buy securities, buy bonds, then buy corporate bonds, then buy equities.
Okay,
Maybe
so that's the Bank of Japan playbook,
right?
And does it include 230% debt to GDP ratio eventually?
Well, yeah. Who cares about those numbers anymore, right? That's Jason, you're looking at the wrong numbers. You're worried about the wrong stuff. It's how fast can we print more? We need to do more. That's the number they're worried about.
Right.
A $7 trillion balance sheet. They're like, we're going to need to jack this sucker up to 10 or something. That's what they're worried about. But yeah, that comes with lots more debt. And as Lacey Hunt and the folks at Hoisington have pointed out, as they have for decades, to the point where you get so more debt that marginal investment from that debt is less and less and less productive. So this whole thing, it's just one giant, they're trying to stimulate, but the tool is not fit for the job. The tool of a central bank is not fit for the job of stimulating economic activity. What it is fit for is stimulating a depression. So then what happens? Well, they have a hammer in one hand and a mallet in the other, and they say, well, we broke it with this, and we're going to fix it with this. So they just keep printing more, and at some point, somebody will figure out how to do something like perhaps a Fannie and Freddie for corporate debt, let's just say, where they guarantee, the Fed maybe or some other agency guarantees corporate debt. Oh, then it'll be lent and spent. Then you'll see the asset prices and the wages and the price of goods and services going up. And, it'll happen. They'll do it. They'll push this thing around as hard as they can until they actually see inflation ticking up. You should take them at their word when they say that that's what they want to do.
Yeah, they do want that, and they want a great reset, which maybe we can get to that. But Dan,
Yeah.
explain to everybody why, and I agree with you, by the way, but why is it that the stimulus stops working at a point? Like you mentioned that it gets less and less effective. I mean, I think a good metaphor for it, but I'm not exactly sure I can explain it financially as well, but from a biological perspective, I'll explain it with caffeine, right? If I drink 3 cups of coffee today, I'm going to have some good energy and, I'm going to perk up and, it's good. But if I drink 17 cups a day, it
Yeah.
doesn't work anymore. In
Nope.
fact, it has counteractive negative effects. Same with sugar, right? And same with, addictions like alcohol and drugs, right? A
Yeah.
little bit of it, is you have a few drinks, you're good. But you have 5 drinks, and that's really counterproductive, right?
That's
So
the metaphor.
why does
Yeah.
that happen with the Fed and the Treasury and the government debt? What's happening there that makes that true?
Because they are pushing money on the system that might not have anything to do with it. I mean, there's only so much investment at any given moment in time. There's only so much investment that the entrepreneurs of the world want to see happen. And if you say, well, all the investment is done. I mean, this is hypothetical. Obviously, a multi-trillion-dollar economy is a much more complex thing. But let's just simplify and say, okay, all the investment in the world is done at this moment. And then the government says, well, we need more growth. So can we just give you the money for free or, at a low interest rate, which is exactly what's happening now? And then they say, oh, well, sure. You give me some cheap money and maybe guarantee it. I got a couple of ideas. So the quality of investment just gets lower and lower and lower. And basically it reminds me of the way people behave when they win the lottery, right? 5 years later, they're broke.
Or in the first .com bubble, I think would be the perfect metaphor, right?
Right.
These venture capitalists just threw money at these stupid ideas. And the companies, I visited a lot of them 20 years ago, and they had the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis in the parking lot. And these guys had the most tenuous, dumb ideas, frankly. And
Women.com, pets.com, peapodgrocer.com. It was a mess.
The sock puppet and the web van and there were worse. I mean, there were worse ideas than that even. But they had beautiful office furniture and lavish parties, and they just couldn't figure out how to spend the money. It made them very undisciplined. It's like spoiling your kid, right? Same idea.
Yeah, and what's happening right now? Well, all the big hedge funds are longer on stocks than they've been in a long time, and people are buying more options as speculators. All the Robinhood crowd and everybody are buying more options. People are opening more, just regular online brokerage accounts, and it's super duper frothy. And of course, the S&P 500 is like 2.6 times sales, which actually that metric correlates extremely well with future 10-year returns. And, it's higher than it's ever been, higher than the .com peak, higher than the 1929 peak. This is the most expensive market ever. And I think it's partially that way because, as the Barron's article pointed out, the Fed put is real. And we hear stories of people gambling in the market with their stimulus checks as well. But I think the Fed put and the confidence that gives people, it's real. And man, we're 60% off that March bottom right now. It's just been like whoosh, a rocket ship. And it went from, hey, this is not a bad opportunity here, to this is the most insanely overvalued market in all of history, like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so it is overvalued.
Without a doubt, without any doubt.
How do you know?
Jeremy Grantham says this is the third real McCoy bubble he's seen, in the past couple decades. And those people studied bubbles. They studied a few dozen of these things. They know from bubbles. And he says, this is it. This is one. It's been crazy. And he's right.
So does that mean tech stocks? Does it mean the S&P? Does it mean the entire economy?
Yes, yes.
I don't know that it means inexpensive bread and butter housing. I think that's pretty sound still, but it's going up. It'll probably reach a bubble at some point. But right now, housing's cheap because interest rates are cheap, you know?
Right. Now, I could, if I wanted to really nitpick with you, Jason, I could take issue with the idea of valuations based on the level of interest rates.
Yeah.
But I think with housing, you're right.
And I would nitpick with you too. I agree with you because it is a credit-based asset. Here's the funny thing though. See, real estate's a little different. And here's why. I know the famous last words. This time it's different, right? I'm not saying this time it's different, but the thing you've got is you've got these people that take out these 3-decade-long mortgages where they don't have to pay them off till 2050. Oh my God. That's incredible, right? And the interest rates are negative today. In real terms, no one could argue that we have negative interest rates. No one except a Keynesian Democrat, right? They could probably argue with that.
Right.
But they would be wrong. So all of us people in the know that we have negative interest rates, right, on mortgages for 3 decades. And, you know, you have this safeguard where you never have to get a margin call. You can, even if rates go up to 14, 18%, all those people that have those incredibly low mortgage rates, that just makes the value of their properties even higher.
Yep.
In the new properties, no one will be buying more properties because rates will be so high, right? Mm-hmm. But the current properties, people would just keep them like they keep a rent-controlled apartment.
Exactly. Right? Same thing. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So like one of my team members, he has a rent-controlled apartment in San Francisco that he and his wife got in 1996. And it's now probably worth like $1.7 million or so. They pay $2,400 a month, I think. Okay. Like they're never giving that thing up. No. But they really want to move. Like it could be nicer. You know, the problem with those rent-controlled places, the owner never has any incentive to fix them up. Yeah. You know, so why would they fix them up? They're not going to get more rent. So there's just capitalism works both ways, right? Yep. And so people with these cheap rates that never get called in for 3 decades, I don't know, it is different. But go ahead and nitpick. I like nitpicking.
No, it's fine. I agree with you. I agree with you. What would a rational person do presented with interest rates at this level? Well, if the money's so cheap, you trade it for something that you think is going to be valuable in 30 years. You do exactly this. And it is exactly correct. You know, I think the real nitpick that I have is really with Warren Buffett, who kind of moved the goalpost and said, well, you know, he used to look at and then he stopped talking about that when it got too high. And now he says, well, you know, if interest rates stay this low for a long time, stocks are a good deal today. And that's a big if in my book. That's a real big if. And it's not the way to think about the value of the stream of cash flows at all, in my opinion.
So let's talk about Bitcoin a little bit. Yeah, you're a fan, right? Are you also a gold bug?
I don't know if I'd call myself a gold bug, but I'm gold as well, and I advocate the ownership of gold and silver, frankly. Yeah.
So gold, silver, and Bitcoin, you like all 3 of those, right?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
I mean, Bitcoin, is that in a bubble, or is that still good? I mean, it's gone up a lot, right?
It has gone up a lot.
It's a one-dimensional asset class. There's no income from Bitcoin. It's highly speculative. What are your thoughts?
It is. It's in the early days. If it's still around when the last Bitcoin is scheduled to be mined in 2140, if it's still around, it's gained widespread adoption. If this continues, I think the market cap of all the Bitcoin is like 320 billion now. I think all the gold in the world is somewhere around 10 trillion or so, 10 or 11 trillion, I want to say, these days. You know, if for some reason, you know, I don't know what the reason would be, but if Bitcoin gets on par with gold, if the future sees more competition in the realm of stores of value, right? Gold is a store of value, silver is a store of value. Bitcoin is a store of value in its very earliest days. You know, you could be looking back at 20,000 or whatever it is right now, 18 or 19,000 Bitcoin and saying, whoa, wow, I wish I'd loaded up back then. And will it be a volatile ride? Well, it's already been one. So the rational expectation is for that to continue. But at some point, this thing becomes money for a lot of people and a store of value for a lot more people. And the supply isn't going to go up at anything more than the prescribed rate. You know, there's 18.5 million of them now. There won't be any more than 21 million, you know, provided the protocols don't change or whatever, between now and 2140. We printed 3 trillion new US dollars this year alone. So, and 4 trillion during all those previous QEs. So, you know, Bitcoin is the hardest currency on earth.
Well, okay, so let me pick at that one for a little bit. What do you think about the political or, you know, they're kind of the same, but regulatory risk? I mean, the governments around the world are in a race to come up with their own cryptocurrencies, their own digital currencies.
Right.
And those will be backed by standing armies, okay, and force of law. And they can just say, okay, you can't use Bitcoin, it's illegal, you know, or we're going to confiscate it like they did with gold in 33, and maybe they'll give you some money for it. Now, granted, this is a worldwide thing. It's not just a US thing. Maybe they can say it's illegal to use Bitcoin, you know, just like it's illegal to use drugs as a commodity. You can't trade in cocaine, right? That's illegal.
So has that law stopped people from trading cocaine?
No, it hasn't stopped them, but you know, it's vastly diminished. I mean, I would argue that if it were a legal commodity,
let me ask you this, Jason.
Traded a lot more.
You think the price of cocaine would be higher if it were legal or lower?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it would be lower in the sense that there'd be more supply when you disrupt the crime syndicate's monopoly, which, by the way, is the same that already happened with marijuana. Okay, so we saw that happen with cannabis. The price dropped dramatically. I remember I visited a cannabis farm with one of my mastermind groups in Colorado shortly after it became legal there. And she said, you know, people think we're making all this money. We're not. It's the price has dropped so much since it became legal. And, you know, the same is true with human trafficking, right? If you want to take the profit out and ruin the industry for the crooks and the scumbags, make prostitution legal. And then you're going to disrupt their monopoly, right? If you want to have competition on Wall Street and you want to have a startup culture, you want to have competition in the banking industry, deregulate it. And then you'll have much more consumer choice and competition. Listen, I'm a libertarian, okay? So I agree with you there. But yes, the legality, in a sense, makes it more expensive when it's illegal, right? Because producing it's illegal. But trading it, I don't know, it's kind of different, right? What do you think?
Well, let's just think of it differently. I've seen this argument, you know, people come at me with this all the time and they say, what if the government gets a hold of this? And I think that's the wrong framing. I think the framing is,
and you're talking about Bitcoin now.
Yeah, Bitcoin. We're back to Bitcoin. That was where we started. That's really what I want to get to. The framing, to me, is not, what if the government makes it illegal or regulates it heavily? The framing to me is, this was created to be outside of that system, period. It is anonymous, it's effectively unhackable, and they're now scrambling to try to compete with this. It's not like they're sitting around wringing their hands and they can't wait to get their hands on it and regulate it. They're scrambling to figure out how the hell they're going to disintermediate and compete, and they're not. That's why
you mean with like FedCoin or the Chinese digital currency. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that is what I mean. They're trying to figure out some way to compete with this. They're not going to make it go away. It was created to get around all that, because the original Bitcoin paper was like, boy, fiat currencies suck. Let's make a truly hard currency, and I'll be damned if they. I mean, it's early days. It's 11 years old, so let's not get too crazy. But so far, so very good. And, we got the PayPal deal, which is like 300 million plus customers, 26 million merchants. I mean, when this thing gets
but PayPal's going to stay.
Lives, they're not going to get rid of it.
PayPal doesn't have, there's no government competition. PayPal's not competing with the government, right? The government, governments don't have to compete on merit. They just make a law.
Right. Right.
And they ensure their monopoly, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It comes out of the barrel of a gun, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't worry. I think most folks worry about that government regulation angle on Bitcoin too much. I think Bitcoin it's gained momentum. It's gained, even at its tiny $320 billion market cap, compared to tens of trillions of dollars of the biggest reserve currency, US dollars, and euros and yen, the other two big ones. We get a little tiny piece of that. Bitcoin gets a little tiny piece of that.
Sure.
And it's going to be $1 million per Bitcoin, just like that. It's going to be, it could wind up being like a multi-hundred bagger over time. And a 50 bagger or so is not hard to envision at all.
Yeah. I mean, see, the thing is, Dan, nobody actually uses it as a currency.
No,
I mean, we all thought that.
I've used it as a currency myself.
Remember when the founder of Overstock, he was on the show, and I really enjoyed him as a guest. He's a big Bitcoin fan, so Overstock was like, it was a huge deal when they said, we're going to accept Bitcoin. You can buy stuff on Overstock.com with Bitcoin, right? And I don't know, I doubt you still can. I'm not sure, but nobody uses it in commerce. It's just like this thing out there that's. They all trade it for dollars. Like, you look at the Cash App, and the whole point of it is, okay, buy some Bitcoin, but you need dollars to buy anything else. So you're just going to convert it to dollars,
But I think the important thing is that, these are the fat pipes that are put in place and nobody's using them, right? But you put the fat pipes in place, eventually people use them. So I don't worry about that at all. In fact, when I see all this adoption by merchants and services like PayPal, I'm like, fine, trade it, trade it in dollars, do whatever you want to do with it. But one day your trust in the US dollar will begin to fall. And you and I both know that when that sort of thing happens, it can happen so fast that if you're not prepared well ahead of time, it can really catch you off balance. As I see it, everything is proceeding very well for Bitcoin to become a currency. Lots of people will accept it as a currency right now.
Well, they've had 11 years and nobody's really accepting it now.
Yeah, but what's 11 years in the life of a currency?
I know, but I mean, they started to accept it a little bit, right? Like people bought pizza with it. Now that pizza would be $100 million or some ridiculous.
That first
$20 million pizza, but it's just not used. And the other thing is, I'm surprised you hear so. It's funny. It's like millennial hypocrisy, right? Millennials are really into it. Okay, they like it because it's a cool technology.
Sure.
But it's super bad for the environment. I mean, mining Bitcoin is terrible for the environment, right? With the electric usage and the.
I mean, that's if you buy that whole argument that creating electricity in certain ways is bad. I understand that they will make.
Well, electricity would be much better for the environment if it was all nuclear, because that's the best form of electricity, bar none. I mean, it's way better than solar or those spinning guillotines in the sky that kill all the birds and take tons of resources to make.
Yep.
And all kinds of environmental sins are created in making solar panels and windmills. I mean,
solar panels are toxic waste.
Terrible. I know.
It's ridiculous. And
there is one place for solar panels, though, on cars and boats and motorhomes. That's a really good use of solar panels. That's about it.
Sure,
so far.
Affordability is nice. That's right. Yeah. The other thing is, we're talking about not using this as a currency. I mean, I can't do that with gold either, really. I know some people will accept, some people would love to accept it, but we have these legal tender laws. But Bitcoin and gold are designed to get around all that. They're stores of value. And frankly, you and I know that, these slips of paper that I have wadded up here in my pocket, this is not this thing that they're in, this silver thing, is a better store of value than all this paper right here.
Yeah.
It's just,
Dan, I don't know. I would love to, like I've said a million times, I'd love to be wrong about this, but those wads of paper have aircraft carriers behind them.
Sure. How many aircraft carriers does it take to decrypt, all your Bitcoin? You can't.
Well, it's not about decrypting it. It's about the fact that those legal tender laws that support those dollars have a giant global institution with military bases in like 170 countries. I mean,
Right.
that's what backs the dollar.
Right. And the Bitcoin network is the biggest one in the world of just about any kind associated with that type of a system. So,
well, like I said, I want you to be right about this, okay?
Yeah, you really do. You really, really do.
Yeah. Okay, so what else should we cover as we wrap it up here, Dan? Anything more just generally on the economy? What's next? What 2021 is going to look like? And you are an inflationist, right? You believe inflation is definitely here or coming, right?
Eventually, it's inevitable. It is the last resort of every fading republic is to degrade the currency. Absolutely. The mechanism is different than most people understand.
Yeah.
But sooner or later, they literally sit around thinking, we need to do something. How can we push prices up? And we should take them at their word. It will happen.
Yeah.
So yes.
Right. Yeah. No, inflation is a fantastic business plan for governments and central banks, because especially when they're debtor nations like the US, right? Because they deflate the value or inflate it away, the value of their debt, whichever way you want to look at it. The debt gets cheaper to repay if there's inflation, right? So that's a very good deal for governments and for central banks. So yeah, they want it. Any thoughts on all this talk about the Great Reset? It's amazing that the elites who run the world, or at least think they run the world, are just completely open about the Great Reset. I mean, it's like they're not even hiding it. And Dan, just come a little closer to your microphone if you can.
Okay. Yeah, I went to the website and read about the Great Reset, and it sounds so, I hope I'm allowed to talk this way. It just sounds so airy-fairy and kind of nebulous. But we all know what it means, right? It's just a bunch of people, like we were talking about, telegraphing that they're going to aggregate as much power as they can to change capitalism, right? And we should take them at their word as well, and they will try to do it. But, you and I both know you can regulate and you can change things and you can clamp down on people, but you can't make markets go away. Right? That's why drug dealers do make so much money, at least the people at the top. The rest of them don't make anything. But I'm not telling you I know how the future comes out. You'll never hear me predict. I say don't predict, prepare. And I think the way you prepare is by being truly diversified, certainly as an investor and as a human. You need to hedge all kinds of eventualities. My wife, she said, I'm buying earthquake bags, which are these backpacks filled with supplies that you might need to strap on if you got to walk out of your house because everything.
The 72-hour bug out bag is what he's talking about.
Bug out, yeah, that's right. Right. So bug out supplies, that's a hedge. And firearms are a hedge, aren't they? And the training that goes along with them and entertaining all the scenarios in which you may have to use them. It's the same with finance. I wouldn't, run out and sell all my stocks and bonds. But I want to be truly diversified, meaning have your stocks and bonds and your cash. That's in the financial system. You need it to function, right? But also go outside the financial system. Have your Bitcoin, have your gold and your silver, preferably not just in the country you live in. We all know, like you're a real estate guy, we all know something about some asset or some potential store of value that might not be traditional. I heard about a guy who's investing in whiskey in casks in Scotland and making money because
I've seen those deals.
Yeah, dark spirits actually can hold their value over time because they sit there for 30 years and not everybody is making this or that particular brand. And people do that with wine, they do it with Ferraris, they do it with guitars. If you talk to rich people in Europe who preserved value over centuries, you say, how do you do it? They say a third, a third, and a third. Land, gold, and art. Not stocks, bonds, and cash. Land, gold, and art. And the idea is that you got to figure out how to preserve wealth over time outside the financial system.
Yeah.
And that's something we need to think about more than ever.
Yeah, and remember, the financial system is low-hanging fruit for the powers that be, because they can just come along and say, oh, you know what? All those retirement accounts that have brokerage accounts attached to them or savings accounts, we're just going to nationalize all that. It's been done before, folks, and they can do that with the stroke of a pen. And that's really easy to get to. It's really low-hanging fruit, you know? So, yeah. Good stuff. Give out your website.
Oh, investorhour.com or stansberryresearch.com. That's where you can find me.
Good stuff. Dan Ferris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, man, it was a lot of fun. I hope we can do this again sometime. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah.